There's something about feelings that we struggle to understand. We ask God to take them away, to lift the burden, to make it easier for us to move on. But what if God is using those very feelings to shape you? What if, instead of removing them, He's allowing them to remain because they are part of something bigger than you can see right now? You see, God doesn't waste anything. Every emotion, every longing, every unanswered prayer, it all has a purpose. Maybe those feelings you're carrying aren't meant to be a weight on your heart, but a tool in His hands, a tool to mold you, to refine you, to make you more into the person He created you to be. Think about the times in life when you've grown the most. Was it during the easy seasons? Was it when everything made sense and went exactly the way you wanted? Or was it during the moments of waiting, the moments of wrestling, the moments when you had to surrender something you didn't want to let go of? God often allows us to feel deeply because deep feelings lead to deep transformation. Maybe He's using this longing in your heart to teach you about patience, about trust, about surrender. Maybe He's showing you that love, real love, isn't just about emotions, but about something far greater, something rooted in faith and obedience. And that's the struggle, isn't it? We want to trust God, but we also want Him to work in a way that feels comfortable. We want Him to take away the pain, remove the desire, erase the memory. And yet, He says, not yet. Why? Because He is doing something in you through it. There are times when we ask God to remove something, and He doesn't, not because He hasn't heard us, but because He knows that without it, we wouldn't grow in the way we need to. Feelings that linger often carry lessons we have not yet fully learned. They press on places in our hearts that still need to be surrendered, areas we still need to trust Him with. Think about Peter walking on water. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he was fine, but the moment he looked at the waves, he started to sink. And isn't that what happens to us? We look at our feelings, at our unanswered prayers, and we start to question. We say, God, why haven't you taken this away? Why do I still feel this way? But maybe God is asking, will you keep your eyes on me even when it doesn't make sense? There is something about unshaken feelings that tests and strengthens your faith. When you don't get what you want right away, you learn how to trust that God knows what's best. When you feel something deeply and it doesn't go away overnight, you begin to understand what it means to surrender, not just with your words, but with your heart. And maybe, just maybe, this feeling that won't leave is a reminder that love, true love, isn't selfish. Maybe God is teaching you how to love beyond just emotion, love that is patient, love that is kind, love that doesn't demand its own way. Maybe He's showing you that real love isn't just about a person, but about learning how to love like He loves. It's easy to think that when something isn't going away, it must be a mistake. But what if it's a process? What if it's a lesson? What if it's a way for God to draw you closer to Him, to teach you something you wouldn't learn any other way? So, don't rush the process. Don't assume that because God hasn't taken away your feelings, He's forgotten about you. He sees you, He knows, and if He's allowing you to walk through this, then trust that He is walking with you. One day you'll look back and understand why this season mattered. One day you'll see how God used this to shape you, to grow you, to prepare you. But for now, in the waiting, in the wondering, in the wrestling, keep your eyes on Him. Keep trusting that if He hasn't removed these feelings yet, He is using them for something greater than you can see right now. We've all prayed prayers that seem to go unanswered. We've asked God to remove feelings, to change our hearts, to make things easier. And yet, for some reason, He doesn't always do it in the way or the timing we expect. It's frustrating, isn't it? We wonder if God is listening, if He sees how much we're struggling. But what if the delay isn't a denial? What if God is not removing those feelings because He is using them to teach you something about trust, about waiting on His perfect timing? One of the hardest things for us to accept is that God doesn't operate on our schedule. We want quick fixes, instant relief, clear answers. But God is not bound by time the way we are. He sees the full picture, the beginning, the middle, and the end, all at once. He knows what's ahead, and sometimes what seems like a delay is actually His protection. Sometimes what feels like silence is really His invitation to trust Him more deeply. Think about Joseph. He had a dream from God, a vision of what his future would be. But before he ever saw it come to pass, he was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. Years went by, and I imagine there were moments when he asked God, why? Why am I still here? Why hasn't the dream you gave me come true? But every step of the journey was preparing him for the moment when God's plan would unfold. If Joseph had been freed too soon, if he had skipped the process, he wouldn't have been ready for the position God had for him. And that's how God works in our lives too. Maybe He hasn't removed your feelings because He's still working on something in you, something that wouldn't be accomplished if He simply took them away. Maybe He's teaching you patience, not just patience with His plan, but patience with your own heart. Maybe He's teaching you that love, real love, isn't just about emotion, but about surrender, about trusting Him even when things don't make sense. There's something about waiting that refines us. It exposes what we truly believe. It reveals whether our faith is in God or just in the outcome we want. And that's where trust comes in. Because trusting God's timing isn't just about waiting, it's about waiting with faith, believing that even when you don't see movement, God is still working. We don't like to wait. We don't like uncertainty. But sometimes God keeps us in the waiting because there's something we need to learn in it. Maybe you're not meant to move on just yet. Maybe God is showing you something about yourself, about your desires, about what you truly need, rather than what you think you want. And maybe this is also about someone else. Have you considered that the timing isn't just about you? That God might be working in another person's heart too? That what seems like a delay in your life is actually alignment in His grand design? We don't always see the connections. We don't always understand how God is orchestrating things behind the scenes. But that's where faith comes in. Faith isn't about seeing, it's about trusting, even in the unknown. When Jesus was on earth, He was never in a hurry. He didn't rush. He wasn't anxious about time. He moved according to the Father's will, never ahead, never behind. And that's the kind of trust we're called to have. To believe that if God hasn't answered the way we want, it's not because He's forgotten us, but because He is leading us to something better. Whether that's a deeper understanding, a greater purpose, or a love that's far richer than what we imagine. We often ask God to take away feelings we don't want to carry anymore. We say, Lord, if this isn't meant to be, then remove it from my heart. But sometimes He doesn't. Sometimes, no matter how much we pray, no matter how much we try to distract ourselves, the feelings remain. And when that happens, we start to wonder why. We start to question whether God is even listening. But maybe He hasn't removed those feelings because He's giving you the opportunity to make a choice. God didn't create us as robots. He didn't program us to feel only what is convenient, to love only what is easy, or to follow Him only when it makes sense. He gave us free will. He gave us the ability to think, to discern, to make decisions. And sometimes, the reason He doesn't remove something from our hearts is because He wants us to bring it to Him and learn to walk in wisdom. It would be easy if God simply erased every emotion that didn't align with His plan. It would be easy if He took away every desire that wasn't meant for us. But love, real love, requires more than that. It requires the willingness to surrender, to trust, and to choose what is right, even when it's hard. If every feeling we had was automatically aligned with God's will, there would be no need for faith, no need for obedience, no need for discernment. But that's not how God works. He allows us to feel deeply so that we can learn to seek Him deeply. Maybe the feelings are still there because God is teaching you something through them. Maybe He is asking you to bring them to Him daily, to wrestle with them, to test them against His Word, because that's how we grow. That's how we learn to distinguish between what is from Him and what is simply from our own desires. And the only way to do that is by choosing to follow Him, not just when it's easy, but when it requires sacrifice. Think about Jesus in the garden before His crucifixion. He prayed, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done." That was a moment of choice. Jesus felt the weight of what was ahead, but He chose obedience. He chose the Father's will over His own feelings. And that's the same kind of surrender God calls us to. Feelings are powerful, but they are not always the final word. Just because something feels strong doesn't mean it is right. And just because something lingers doesn't mean it is meant to stay. That's why God gives us wisdom. That's why He calls us to walk by faith, not by emotion. He wants us to choose, not based on how we feel in the moment, but based on what we know to be true. Maybe He hasn't taken away your feelings because He wants you to make the decision to trust Him, to obey Him, even when it hurts. Maybe He is waiting for you to stop asking Him to remove the feelings and start asking Him for the strength to follow Him no matter what. Because at the end of the day, love is not just about what we feel, it's about what we choose. God's greatest gift to us is the ability to love, to choose, to surrender. And sometimes the very thing we wish He would take away is the thing He is using to draw us closer to Him. So if the feelings are still there, don't just ask God to remove them. Ask Him to show you how to honor Him through them. Ask Him to help you walk in wisdom, to make the right choice, even when it's hard. Because the greatest act of love is not just feeling something, it's choosing to trust God with it. There are times in life when we ask God to take away something, to lift a burden, to remove a longing, and yet nothing changes. The feelings remain. The emotions still stir, and we wonder why. We think, God, if this isn't meant to be, why do I still feel this way? But maybe God isn't removing these feelings because He's using them to draw you closer to Him. God often allows us to walk through seasons of longing because it's in those moments that we seek Him most. When everything is easy, when life goes exactly the way we want, we tend to rely on our own strength. We pray less. We seek Him less. We assume we have everything under control. But when we are wrestling with something, when we are holding on to feelings we don't understand, we find ourselves on our knees more often. We cry out to Him with an urgency we wouldn't have otherwise. Think about the times in your life when you've grown the most in your faith. Were they in the seasons when everything was going according to plan? Or were they in the moments when you had nowhere else to turn but God? He allows us to feel deeply because those feelings push us toward Him. They remind us that we are not in control, that we need His wisdom, that we need His presence more than anything else. Sometimes God doesn't take away our feelings because He is using them to teach us dependence on Him. He is asking, will you trust me even when you don't understand? Will you keep seeking me even when I don't give you the answer you want? There's something about unanswered prayers that deepens our relationship with God. It forces us to move beyond surface-level faith. It teaches us to worship Him, not just for what He can do for us, but for who He is. And that's the kind of faith He wants to build in you. The Apostle Paul knew what it was like to ask God for something and not receive the answer he wanted. He had what he called a thorn in the flesh, something that troubled him deeply. 3 times he prayed for God to take it away, but God didn't. Instead, he said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul wanted relief, But God wanted to reveal his strength in the middle of Paul's struggle. And that's what he does in our lives too. Maybe he hasn't removed your feelings because he is teaching you that his grace is enough. That even when you don't get the answer you want, he is still good. He is still faithful. He is still enough. And maybe that's what this season is really about. Not about whether these feelings stay or go, but about whether you will learn to seek God first, above anything and anyone else. Maybe he is allowing you to wrestle with this because he knows that through it, you will learn to lean on him in a way you never have before. God doesn't waste anything. Every emotion, every unanswered prayer, every moment of confusion, he uses it all. And if he is allowing you to walk through this, it's because he has something for you in it. So instead of asking him to take it away, maybe it's time to ask him, Lord, what do you want to teach me through this? How can I draw closer to you because of this? Because when you seek him first, everything else falls into place. And in the end, that's what matters most. We like to believe that when something is right for us, it will come easily. That if a feeling lingers, it must mean it's from God. And if a door is open, we should walk through it. But that's not always how God works. Sometimes he allows feelings to remain, not to lead us towards something, but to refine us in the waiting. Maybe the reason he hasn't taken these feelings away is because he is using them to shape your heart, to test your faith, to deepen your character in ways that only struggle can accomplish. God is more interested in your growth than your comfort. He doesn't just want to give you what you want. He wants to make you into the person he created you to be. And often that means walking through seasons of longing, of uncertainty, of surrender. It means learning to hold your desires with open hands, trusting that he knows what's best, even when it's not what you would have chosen. Think about Abraham. God promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, yet for years he and Sarah remained childless. The waiting was painful, the longing was real, and at one point they tried to take matters into their own hands, thinking they had to force God's promise to come true. But God's timing was different than theirs, and in the waiting he was doing something much deeper than simply fulfilling a promise. He was shaping Abraham into a man of unshakable faith. And that's what he does in our lives too. He doesn't just give us what we want the moment we ask for it. He doesn't always take away the struggle when we wish he would. Instead, he allows us to walk through it, to wrestle with it, to grow in it. Because faith isn't just about receiving, it's about trusting. It's about believing that even in the longing, even in the unanswered questions, God is still good. God is still at work. Maybe you've been asking God to take away these feelings because you think that will bring you peace. But what if peace isn't found in the removal of emotions, but in the surrender of them? What if God is teaching you that true peace doesn't come from getting what you want, but from trusting him no matter the outcome? Feelings are not the enemy. They are part of how God created you, but they are not meant to lead you. God is. And if he has allowed these feelings to remain, then he has a purpose for them, even if you don't see it yet. Maybe he is teaching you patience. Maybe he is showing you how to love with purity, without expectation. Maybe he is using this to prepare you for something far greater than you can imagine. And that's the challenge, isn't it? To believe that God's plan is better. To trust that even if things don't go the way you hope, his way is still the best way. It's one thing to say we trust God when life is going smoothly, but it's another thing entirely to trust him when our hearts are aching, when the future is uncertain, when we don't understand why he is allowing us to feel the way we do. But that's the kind of faith he calls us to. A faith that says, Lord, even if you don't take this away, I will trust you. Even if I don't get the answer I want, I will follow you. Even if I never understand why, I will believe that you are good. That is the faith that transforms us. That is the faith that leads us into the fullness of God's purpose. So don't be discouraged if you're still carrying these feelings. Don't believe the lie that God has forgotten you or that He is ignoring your prayers. He sees you. He knows what you're going through, and He is using this not to hurt you, but to refine you, to make you stronger, to bring you closer to Him. Because in the end, it's not about whether these feelings stay or go, it's about whether you will trust God with them. And when you do, you will find that He is always enough. There are moments when we ask God to take something away because we believe that will bring us peace. We think, Lord, if you would just remove these feelings, if you would just take away this longing, then I could move on, then I could stop wondering, then I could have clarity. But what if clarity doesn't come from the absence of feelings? What if true clarity comes from trusting God even when the feelings remain? God doesn't always remove something just because we ask Him to. He sees beyond what we see. He knows what we do not know. And sometimes He allows us to carry something longer than we expected, not to confuse us, but to teach us how to rely on Him more fully. Maybe He isn't taking away these feelings because He wants to show you that your peace isn't dependent on what happens with this person, but on your relationship with Him. We tend to believe that once we get the answer we're looking for, once we know whether to hold on or let go, then we will feel at rest. But peace doesn't come from having everything figured out. Peace comes from knowing that even when we don't have the answers, God is still in control. That even when we don't understand what He's doing, we can still trust His heart. Think about Peter walking on the water toward Jesus. As long as his eyes were fixed on the Lord, he stayed above the waves. But the moment he focused on the storm, the moment he let his circumstances define his faith, he began to sink. And that's what happens to us. When we focus too much on trying to control our emotions, when we let our circumstances dictate our peace, we begin to drown in our own uncertainty. But when we keep our eyes on Jesus, when we trust that He is leading us, even when we don't understand the way forward, that's when we find true peace. Maybe you've been praying for God to remove these feelings because you think that's the only way to move on. But what if moving on doesn't mean waiting for your emotions to change? What if it means trusting God in the middle of the emotions? What if it means saying, Lord, I don't know why I still feel this way, but I will follow you anyway. I don't know what you're doing, but I will trust that you are working all things together for my good. That kind of faith is not easy. It requires surrender. It requires letting go of the need to have all the answers. It requires believing that God knows what He's doing even when we don't. And that's what He is inviting you to do, to lay this at His feet, not with the demand that He take it away, but with the trust that however He chooses to lead, it will be for your good. There is freedom in surrender. There is freedom in saying, Lord, I don't have to understand everything to trust you. I don't have to feel a certain way to walk in obedience. I don't have to know the future to believe that your plans for me are better than my own. That is the kind of faith that brings peace. Not a peace that comes from circumstances, but a peace that comes from knowing that your life is in God's hands. So if the feelings are still there, don't let them shake your faith. Don't let them define your future. Bring them to God every day if you have to, and trust that He will lead you exactly where you need to be. Because real peace isn't found in the absence of emotions, it's found in the presence of God. And when you have Him, you have everything you need. There comes a time when we have to stop asking why and start asking what. Instead of saying, God, why won't you take these feelings away? We begin to ask, Lord, what do you want me to learn from this? Because the truth is, God never wastes anything. Not our struggles, not our emotions, not even our unanswered prayers. If He has allowed something to remain in your heart, there is a reason for it. And that reason is never to break you, but to build you, to bring you closer to Him, to shape you into the person He created you to be. We don't always see what God is doing when we're in the middle of it. Our emotions can feel like a storm, pulling us in different directions, making us question, making us doubt. But God is not a God of confusion. He is a God of order, of purpose, of direction. He does not leave us wandering without a plan. If He is allowing you to walk through this, it is because He is using it to refine you, to strengthen your faith, to prepare you for what is ahead. Sometimes we hold on to feelings thinking they are the key to our happiness, but God sees the bigger picture. He sees what we cannot. He knows what is best, not just for this moment, but for eternity. And He is always working for our good, even when we don't understand how. Think of Joseph, thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. For years he must have wondered why. He must have questioned how any of this could be part of God's plan, but in time he saw it. He saw how God had been weaving every painful moment together, not just for His own good, but for the good of many. What others meant for harm, God meant for good. And that is how He works in our lives too. What feels like a burden, what feels like unanswered prayers, what feels like a season of waiting, God is using it all. And maybe He's using this to teach you how to love without expectation, how to give without needing something in return. Maybe He's teaching you that real love isn't just about feelings, it's about sacrifice, about patience, about choosing to honor Him even when it costs you something. It's easy to love when everything goes our way. It's easy to have faith when we see the outcome we want. But what about when we don't? What about when we still have feelings that don't make sense? When we still don't have the clarity we've been praying for? That's where real faith is tested. That's where trust is built. God is not asking you to carry this alone. He is not asking you to figure it all out on your own. He is asking you to bring it to Him, to trust Him with it, to let Him work in His way and in His time. And when you do, you will find that He is enough. You will find that whether these feelings stay or go, whether the path ahead is clear or uncertain, He is still leading you. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about your feelings, it's about your faith. It's about whether you believe that God is who He says He is, that He is good, that He is faithful, that He is working all things together for your good, even when you don't understand. So let go of the need to control. Let go of the need to have all the answers. Trust that God knows what He's doing. Trust that if He has allowed you to walk through this, it is because He is preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. And when the time is right, when His purpose has been fulfilled, He will make everything clear. Until then, trust Him, because He has never failed and He never will. Through every lingering feeling, every unanswered prayer, every moment of wondering why, God is not absent. He is not ignoring you. He is not punishing you. He is working in ways you cannot see, shaping you, strengthening you, drawing you closer to Him. If He hasn't taken these feelings away, it's because He has a purpose for them, one that goes beyond what you feel in this moment. Maybe He is teaching you patience. Maybe He is deepening your trust. Maybe He is refining your faith so that it is no longer dependent on circumstances, but rooted in Him alone. So instead of asking God to take these feelings away, ask Him to use them for His glory. Instead of waiting for emotions to change before you move forward, surrender them to Him and trust that He will lead you exactly where you need to be. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about your feelings, it's about your faith. It's about believing that even when you don't understand, even when the path ahead is unclear, God is still in control. And when you trust Him fully, you will find that He is always enough.